I told my ex-wife's mother something I never thought I would say out loud. And the moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to take them back. I think I'm ready to date again. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Sandra just stood there in her doorway, looking at me. Not with shock. Not with judgment. Just that quiet, steady look she always had. The same one she used when she was listening to something important. Like she was weighing every word before she let herself react. I had driven to Birchwood Lane 3 times before I finally knocked. The first time, I pulled up, sat outside for 10 minutes, then drove home. The second time, I made it to the end of her driveway before I turned around. The third time, I forced myself out of the car before my brain could talk me out of it. My hands felt cold. My chest felt tight. And standing there on her porch, I had no script, no plan, no good reason for being there except one. Sandra was the only person I trusted with the truth. That alone felt strange to admit. She was Claire's mother. My ex-wife's mother. By every normal rule of how life is supposed to work, she should have been the last person I ran to. But life had not been following normal rules for a while now, and Sandra had a way of making hard things feel possible to say out loud. She stepped back and opened the door wider without a word. Her kitchen smelled like chamomile tea and something warm coming from the oven. It was the kind of smell that hits you before you even sit down and makes your shoulders drop without you realizing it. She moved to the stove quietly, filled 2 mugs, and placed one in front of me like she had been expecting me. Maybe she had. Sandra always seemed to know things slightly before other people did. I wrapped both hands around the mug but didn't drink. My friends keep telling me to get back out there, I said. My sister set me up twice this year. Everyone around me has an opinion. Everyone keeps saying it's time. Sandra sat across from me and waited. And every time I think about actually doing it, I said slowly, I hear this voice in my head, telling me I'm doing something wrong, telling me it's too soon, telling me that moving forward means leaving something behind. She still didn't speak, but her eyes stayed on mine, steady and patient. I stared down at the steam rising from the mug. The worst part, I said, is that it feels like I'm betraying Claire. That sentence sat between us like something heavy dropped onto the table. Claire had been her daughter. I had been her son-in-law for 8 years. And now here I was, 3 years after the divorce, sitting in the same kitchen where we used to eat Christmas dinner together, telling her mother that I thought about moving on but felt guilty every time I tried. Most people would have found that strange. Sandra just nodded slowly. I don't even know why I came here, I admitted. I just didn't know where else to go. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, yes you do. And somehow that was worse. Because she was right. I came because somewhere in the back of my mind I knew that Sandra would not tell me what I wanted to hear. She never did. Not when Claire and I were struggling. Not when the marriage was falling apart. Not when I called her 6 months after the divorce to apologize for something I still couldn't fully name. She had listened then too. And she had said things that were true instead of things that were easy. That was rare. I had learned not to waste it. So I told her everything. I told her about the nights when the apartment felt too quiet. About how I would sit on the couch after work and flip through my phone and feel nothing. About how lonely was not even the right word for it. It was more like being invisible. Like life was happening at a volume I could no longer hear clearly. I told her about the dating app one had downloaded twice and deleted twice. About the way I froze every time I got to the part that asked me to describe myself. About how I could fix a car engine in under 2 hours but could not write 3 sentences about who I was anymore. Sandra listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly down Birchwood Lane. The oven clicked off. A small clock above the window ticked in the background like it had somewhere to be. Sandra looked at me carefully. Then she asked me one question. Just one. And it was not the question I expected. She did not ask me how long I had been feeling this way. She did not ask me whether I still had feelings for Claire. She did not give me a list of advice or tell me what my next step should be. She leaned forward slightly, folded her hands on the table and said, James, why do you want to date? I opened my mouth. The answer felt obvious. I'm lonely, I said. She shook her head. That's not what I asked. I frowned. I don't understand. She held my gaze and did not blink. I asked you why you want to date. She paused. Are you doing this because you're lonely? Or because somewhere inside you, you still believe you deserve to be loved? I had no answer. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in years. I drove home from Birchwood Lane without turning on the radio. That question followed me the whole way back. It sat in the passenger seat. It walked up the stairs with me. It was still there when I dropped my keys on the counter and stood in the middle of my apartment without turning on a single light. Do you still believe you deserve to be loved? I had expected Sandra to give me advice. A list, maybe. Some kind words. A gentle push in the right direction. I had not expected her to reach into my chest and pull out a question I had never once thought to ask myself. I sat on the couch for a long time that night. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building near the edge of town. Small, clean, nothing on the walls except one framed photo near the door. A road somewhere in the mountains that I had driven through years ago and always meant to go back to. I had moved in 3 years ago, right after the divorce, and I told myself it was temporary. A place to land. A place to figure things out. But 3 years had passed and I still had not hung anything else on the walls. Still had not bought a second chair for the kitchen table. Still lived like I was waiting for permission to actually settle in. I had not noticed that until tonight. Something about Sandra's question had flipped a light on in a room I had kept dark on purpose. I thought about Claire. Not with bitterness, that part had faded a long time ago. What we had was real when it started, and both of us had tried. But we grew into different people going in different directions, and eventually the distance between us became impossible to close. The divorce had been quiet, almost too quiet. No anger, no blame, no dramatic ending. Just two people agreeing that staying would hurt more than leaving. And I had thought that made it easier. It hadn't. The quiet endings leave their own kind of mark. There's nothing sharp to point to, nothing clean to get angry at. Just a slow, gray kind of loss that settles into your routine and becomes the background noise of everything. I had been living inside that noise for 3 years. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, which never happened. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and realized my mind was already moving. Not in the anxious, circular way it had been moving for months. More like something had come loose overnight and was finally trying to find its place. I made coffee and stood by the window. Down on the street below, a man was walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate every crack in the pavement. A woman jogged past with headphones in, not looking at anything except the road ahead. A delivery truck idled at the corner, hazard lights blinking in a slow, steady rhythm. Normal. Ordinary. Alive. I realized I had been watching the world from this window for 3 years like it was a television show I was not part of. And I was tired of watching. That afternoon I drove to the garage, finished a brake job on a pickup truck, helped a colleague track down a strange noise in a sedan that turned out to be a loose heat shield, and clocked out at 5. On the way home, I sat in my truck in the parking lot with my phone in my hand. I opened the App Store. I had done this before. Twice, in fact. Both times I got as far as the download screen and then backed out. The whole thing felt foreign, uncomfortable, like trying on someone else's coat and pretending it fit. This time I let it download. The icon appeared on my screen, small and almost cheerful looking, and I stared at it the way you stare at something you're not sure you're ready for. I tapped it. Create your profile. The first question was simple. What's your name and age? I typed that easily enough. James, 39. Fine. Next question. What do you do? Mechanic. Easy. Then came the hard one. Tell us about yourself. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I typed divorced and deleted it. Typed starting over and deleted that too. I wrote recently single and that sounded wrong. I tried just a regular guy looking for something real and cringed. Every sentence I wrote felt like a costume. Like I was describing someone I used to be or someone I was pretending to be, and not the actual person sitting in a truck in a parking lot struggling to write 3 honest sentences. Finally, I typed something simple. James, 39. I fix engines for a living and I am still figuring out the rest. Looking for someone real. I read it back twice. It was not clever. It was not impressive, but it was true. And after 3 years of going through motions and keeping a careful distance from anything that felt too honest, true felt like the bravest thing I could offer. I hit save before my brain could stop me. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat, started the truck, and drove home with my heart beating slightly faster than normal. Sandra had asked me if I still believed I deserved love. I had not answered her that night at her kitchen table. But somewhere in that parking lot, without saying a word out loud, I had started to answer the question for myself. I was not sure yet, but for the first time in a long time I was willing to find out. The first message came while I was cooking dinner that night. Just a hello and a short profile that seemed genuine. I stared at it for so long my pasta boiled over. I wrote back. She wrote back. It was polite, a little stiff, like two people trying to shake hands through a screen. But it was something. I went to bed that night feeling strange. Not happy exactly. Not hopeful in any big way. But like a door had been opened in a room that had been shut for a very long time. The air coming through was unfamiliar. A little cold. But it was moving. And moving, I was starting to understand, was the whole point. I called Sandra the next morning. Not to report back. Not to ask for more advice. I just called. She picked up on the second ring. I did it, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. Good, she said simply. Then she asked if I wanted to come by for dinner on Sunday. I said yes before I finished thinking about it. I didn't know then what those Sunday dinners would slowly become. I had no idea what was quietly starting. All I knew was that I had taken a step I thought I would never take, and the ground had held. And for that night, in that small apartment with one too many chairs at the kitchen table, a detail I had only just noticed the night before, that was enough. My first date lasted 34 minutes. I know that because I checked my watch when she stood up and I checked it again when I got back to my truck. 34 minutes. Less time than it takes to change an oil filter. I sat behind the wheel and let out a long breath and said nothing to no one. She had been perfectly nice. That was the honest truth. Polite questions, polite answers, polite smiles. We talked about our jobs, our neighborhoods, whether the coffee in that particular cafe was actually good or just expensive. She laughed at the right moments. I laughed at the right moments. And when it was over we both knew, without saying it, that nothing real had happened between us. We shook hands outside. She said good luck out there. I said you too. We walked in opposite directions and I have never seen her again. I didn't feel crushed driving home. That surprised me. I thought I would feel worse. Instead I felt something closer to tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long shift at the garage. Quieter kind. The kind that settles into your shoulders when you have been pretending to be relaxed for 34 minutes straight. I called nobody that night. I just made a sandwich, sat by the window, and watched the street below for a while. The second date came about a week later. This one lasted longer. 40 minutes, maybe a little more. We met at a small restaurant near the river on Callaway Street. She had a bright smile and talked fast, which I usually like. But about 15 minutes in, I realized most of what she was talking about was her previous relationship. How badly it had ended. How long she had been trying to recover. How terrible the whole experience of dating after heartbreak was. I sat across from her and I listened. And here is the strange part. I understood every word she was saying. I knew exactly what that weight felt like. But understanding someone and connecting with someone are two very different things. And that night I could feel the distance between those two things like a wall neither of us could reach through. When I got home I dropped onto the couch and looked at the ceiling for a while. I thought about quitting the app. I thought about calling my sister and telling her she had been right all along. That I was not ready. That the whole thing was a mistake. My phone was in my hand and everything. I didn't call her. Instead I just lay there and thought about something Sandra had said the week before at Sunday dinner. We had been standing in her kitchen. She was washing a pot and I was drying dishes beside her. And she had said something I hadn't fully understood at the time. She said that the hardest part of starting over is not meeting new people. The hardest part is sitting with yourself in the in-between moments. The moments when nothing is happening and the silence gets loud and you have to decide, on purpose, that you still want to try. I hadn't asked her what she meant. But lying on that couch that night, I understood it. I kept the app. The next few weeks moved slowly. A few short conversations online that faded out before they became anything. A coffee that got canceled and never rescheduled. One evening walk through the park near my building with a woman who was thoughtful and interesting and clearly still in love with someone else, though she hadn't said so directly. I could just feel it. Some things don't need to be spoken. None of it broke me. That was the thing I kept coming back to. I had been so afraid that trying would destroy what little steadiness I had rebuilt. But each quiet failure just sat there, manageable, like rain you had dressed for. I started showing up to Sandra's on Sunday dinners without needing a reason. She never made it strange. There was always food, always something easy on the radio, always room at the table. We talked about the neighborhood, about her garden that had gone a little wild on the left side, about a book she was reading that she said I would probably like even though I hadn't finished a book in 2 years. One evening I helped her fix a loose hinge on the back door. Simple job. 5 minutes with the right screwdriver. But she stood nearby and handed me things I didn't ask for and said thank you in a way that felt like she actually meant it. Not the polite kind of thank you, the kind that lands somewhere. I drove home that night with the radio off. Something was sitting in the back of my mind that I did not want to look at directly. It was quiet and it was patient and it had been there for a few weeks by then. Growing slowly, the way things do when you are not watching. I was not ready to name it, but I could feel it. And I already knew, somewhere underneath the part of me that was still being careful, that the next time Sandra asked me something true, I might not be able to look away from the answer. I need to be honest about something. The more dates I went on, the worse I got at pretending. The app was still on my phone. I kept swiping, kept showing up to coffee shops and restaurants with a smile ready. But somewhere between date 4 and date 7, I stopped being nervous before meeting someone new. And not in a good way. I stopped being nervous because I stopped caring. That scared me more than the nerves ever did. There was one evening in particular. I had just come back from a dinner date downtown. She was smart, funny, genuinely kind. On paper, she was exactly what I thought I was looking for. But sitting across from her at that restaurant, all I could think about was how tired I was of performing. Smiling at the right moments. Laughing just enough. Saying the right things about my job, my past, my plans. By the time the check came, I felt more exhausted than I did after a 10-hour shift at the garage. I drove home in silence. No music, just the sound of the road. When I got back to my apartment building, I sat in the parking lot for a while before going inside. I stared at the steering wheel like it owed me an answer. Something was wrong and I knew it, but I could not figure out what it was. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. Just checking in. Hope your week is going well. I stared at that message for a long time. I texted back. Can I call you? She replied in seconds. Of course. I called her right there in the parking lot with the engine off. She picked up on the second ring. I did not even say hello properly. I just said, I think I am doing this whole thing wrong. She did not panic. She did not flood me with questions. She just said, tell me what happened. So I did. I told her about the dinner, about the woman who was perfectly nice, about how I felt nothing real, and how guilty that made me feel. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then she said something I was not expecting. Maybe you are not broken, James. Maybe you are just honest now. I did not know what to say to that. She explained it slowly, the way she always did when she wanted me to actually hear her. She said that, after enough pain, some people lose the ability to fake connection. And that is not a flaw. That is growth. The problem, she said, is that growth without direction just feels like loneliness. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked her, so what is the direction? She paused. I think you already know, she said quietly. And then she changed the subject before I could ask her what she meant. That bothered me all night. Sunday dinner that week felt different from the moment I arrived. I noticed it before I even got through the door. Sandra had cooked more than usual. The table was set properly, not just plates dropped down, but actual effort. Candles. The good glasses she usually kept in the cabinet above the fridge. I asked her if someone else was coming. She said no, she just felt like doing things nicely for a change. I did not push it. We ate and talked the way we always did. But I kept catching myself watching her. The way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking hard about something. The way she refilled my glass without asking because she already knew I would want more. I had been coming to this house for months. Somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like my ex-wife's childhood home and started feeling like somewhere I genuinely wanted to be. That realization sat heavy on my chest for the rest of the meal. After dinner, we moved to the porch the way we usually did. The neighborhood was quiet. A few lights on in windows across the street. The air had that sharp, clean smell that comes right before winter fully arrives. Sandra wrapped both hands around her mug and stared out at the yard. She said, "Do you ever think about what you actually want? Not what you think you should want. What you actually want." I said yes. More than I used to. She nodded slowly but did not look at me. She just kept staring at the yard like she was reading something written in the dark. I wanted to say more. The words were right there. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly. More like respect. I did not want to say the wrong thing and crack something that had taken months to build carefully. So I just sat beside her. And for a long time, neither of us spoke. But the silence did not feel empty. It felt like the kind of silence that exists between two people who have already said a lot without using any words at all. The kind of silence that means something. When I finally drove home that night, I was not confused anymore. I knew exactly what I felt. I just did not know yet if I had the courage to do anything about it. And that question followed me all the way home, up the stairs, through my front door, and into every quiet corner of my apartment. I sat on the edge of my bed and made a decision. I was going to stop pretending I did not feel what I felt. But I was going to do it right, carefully, honestly, because Sandra deserved that. And honestly, so did I. I deleted the dating app on a Tuesday morning.
No dramatic moment.
No music playing in the background. I just picked up my phone, held my thumb over the icon, and pressed delete. It was the easiest decision I had made in years, which told me everything I needed to know. That same week, I called Sandra and asked if I could come by Saturday. Not for dinner. Not as a habit. I said I had something I wanted to talk to her about. There was a short pause on her end. Then she said, "I will put the kettle on." I did not sleep well that Friday night. Not because I was unsure. I was completely sure. I could not sleep because for the first time in a long time something genuinely mattered. And when something matters, your mind does not let you rest easily. Saturday arrived gray and cold. The kind of day where the sky stays low and everything feels quieter than usual. I drove to Birchwood Lane with both hands on the wheel and the heater running. I parked in front of her house, turned off the engine, and sat there for a minute. There was a light on in the kitchen. I could see her moving around through the window. Just a shadow, but I knew it was her. I got out of the car before I could overthink it. She opened the door before I knocked. She was wearing a dark green sweater and her hair was pinned up loosely, a few strands falling near her face. She looked at me for just a second longer than usual. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The kitchen smelled like tea and something sweet, maybe honey in the warm air. She had already set out 2 mugs. I sat down at the table and wrapped my hands around mine. She sat across from me and waited. She did not rush me. I looked at the table for a moment. Then I looked at her. I said, "I stopped dating. I deleted the app. I am done with it." She did not look surprised. She just asked me why. I told her the truth. I said that I had been going on dates looking for something real, and the whole time the most real thing in my life had been these Sunday dinners and late porch conversations and phone calls in parking lots. I told her that I had been so focused on finding connection somewhere out there that I almost missed what was already right in front of me. She was quiet. Her hands stayed still around her mug. I kept going because stopping felt more dangerous than finishing. I told her that I knew this was complicated. I knew who she was in relation to my past. I knew there were 100 reasons why this was an unusual thing to say. But I also knew that the way I felt around her was not something I was willing to keep pretending did not exist. Sandra looked at me for a long moment. Her expression was not shocked. It was more like someone who had been carrying a thought carefully for a long time and was finally being given permission to set it down. She said, I have known for a while, James. I blinked. You knew. She nodded slowly. I did not want to say anything first because you needed to find your way here on your own. If I had said something sooner, you would have always wondered if you chose this freely or if you were just following someone else's lead. I sat back. That was why you kept redirecting the conversation, I said. She smiled. You noticed that. I told her I thought about it almost every night. She laughed softly. Just once. But it broke the tension in the room like a window opening on a warm day. What she said next was quiet and simple. She said, I am not easy to love, James. I have my own history, my own things I am still working through. This is not going to be simple. I told her I was not looking for simple. I had tried simple. Simple left me staring at steering wheels in dark parking lots feeling nothing. She looked at me steadily. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. That was it. No speech.
No dramatic declaration.
Just her hand on mine and both of us sitting in the truth of it. We took it slow. That part was real and I want to be clear about it. There was no sudden shift where everything became easy. There were awkward moments. There were evenings where the weight of our history sat at the table with us like an uninvited guest. There were conversations that were hard to start and harder to finish. But we had them. Every single one. Winter turned into spring. Sunday dinners became something we planned instead of something that just happened. We went on actual walks. Talked about things we had never brought up before. She told me things about her life, her marriage, her years of holding everything together quietly, that made me understand her in ways I had not expected. I told her things about myself I had not said to anyone. There was one evening in late spring when we were sitting on the porch again. The oak tree in the front yard had come back fully, green and full and alive after the long winter. The neighborhood smelled like fresh grass and something blooming nearby. Sandra had her feet up on the railing and was reading. I was not doing anything, just sitting, just being there. She looked over at me and said, You look relaxed. I told her I was. Genuinely. She smiled and went back to her book. I sat there watching the street for a while. Kids riding bikes. A dog being walked by someone in a hurry. Ordinary life moving at its ordinary pace. And I felt something I had not felt in years. Not excitement. Something quieter and stronger than excitement. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months after that Saturday in her kitchen, I drove to a small jewelry shop 2 towns over. I spent a long time there. The woman behind the counter was patient with me. I told her I was not looking for something flashy. I was looking for something honest. She showed me a simple ring, a small stone set in a clean band. Nothing loud, nothing trying too hard. I bought it without hesitation. I carried it in my jacket pocket for 3 weeks. Not because I was unsure, but because I was waiting for the right moment to find me rather than forcing one. Found me on a Sunday evening. We were on the porch. The sky was going gold and orange at the edges. Sandra was talking about a book she had just finished. She was laughing at something the author had written. And I looked at her mid-sentence and thought, this is it. This is the moment. I reached into my jacket pocket. Sandra, I said. She stopped laughing and looked at me. Something in my voice made her sit up slowly. I got down on one knee on that old porch. The same porch where she had first asked me if I still believed I deserved love. The same porch where I had sat in confusion and slowly found my way back to myself. I told her that she had not just helped me move forward. She had helped me understand what moving forward was actually for. I told her that I did not want another Sunday dinner without knowing she was mine and I was hers. I told her she was the clearest, truest thing that had happened to me in a very long time. Then I asked her to marry me. Sandra looked at the ring. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were bright and her voice was steady when she spoke. She said yes.